Welcome to episode 7 of season 3 of Ed's Not Dead. I'm Robbie Dodd. I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. C.H. Siddons.
Hello.
Welcome back.
It's good to be back.
And Mr. Peter Crable.
Buongiorno.
Hey, fellas, it's been a long time.
It's been too long.
We have hardly any content this year in season 3.
It's sad.
Don't repeat the barrier, Robbie.
Have we hit the wall?
No.
Okay.
Jeez.
It's been a
you just
while.
repeated 2 barriers.
Kudos to Mr. Crable. He is our unofficial producer and leader of the band. He tries to get us together as much as possible.
Both of your stupid schedules are
I know they're difficult.
a little encumbering.
I know. And Casey's not responding to texts as quickly as he used
I
to.
don't know what he's doing with his life. I really don't.
Well, we are glad to be back, and we are glad you're with us. Thanks as always for following Ed's Not Dead and listening to the pod. You can find us at Ed's Not Dead PC on Twitter, and of course, check out our website, edsnotdead.com. As always, Ed's Not Dead is brought to you by Pulp Education, a full-service educational media company specializing in leadership, instruction, and 21st century school reform. We've got a big show tonight.
Big show.
We are going to delve into what candidates in the shrinking Democratic field.
Yeah, it makes it easier for us to do.
Yes.
There's less people.
Yeah.
And I don't have any quizzes on
Less
candidates
reading.
anymore.
No quizzes. But you have a quiz for our special guest.
We do.
Yes.
Yes, we do.
So yeah, we're gonna talk about what the Democratic field says about education, and we are certainly not endorsing any of them, but we are obviously interested in where they lean educationally.
Yes.
Right?
And ideas that they have.
Ideas that they have.
There is some overlap, but there are some standout ideas, I think.
I tend to think there's a lot of overlap, but
There is a lot of overlap.
but you guys are more politically informed than me. And then we are really excited to welcome Natalie Wexler on the show, the author of The Knowledge Gap, who we talked about knowledge versus process a few shows ago, and she tweeted at us about our lack of knowledge about her book.
Yeah, a lack of understanding.
Lack of understanding. So we're stoked to have her on Ed's Not Dead, and we're going to talk about knowledge versus process and how she sees knowledge as the missing link.
Content versus skills.
Content versus skills, yeah. I'm sorry, I described it in a very 90s way. Those are both fake laughs.
I wasn't trained in it.
I like it.
Okay. Anyway, and then at the end of the show, we'll see what Mr. Siddons has in store for us. It might be nothing.
See if I can cobble something together.
On episode 7. Anyway, so as we always do, let's get into show feedback. Mr. Krabs, what do you got for us?
Well, as we alluded to last time, it's finally come out. We had a big article published from the three of us.
That's right.
One of the cover stories in the February issue of AMLE magazine, the Association for Middle Level Education, an article called Project Success, The Way Forward in Middle School. So check that out. It's online. If you're a member of AMLE, you've already gotten it. Would love to hear some feedback on that.
Thanks to the AMLE folks, the AMLE folks, for publishing us.
That's right.
Okay, so just before we move on to all these screenshots of tweets that Casey's put in the show notes,
I wanted to make it big enough so you could see it.
I got a couple bones to pick. You guys often portray me as the diva of the show. So first off, in the awesome article, which author was listed third in that article?
I think me?
No, that would be me.
Oh, was it?
That would be me.
Well, because they knew that. Never mind.
They do what?
Nothing.
Did you send in the order of which we were listed, Mr. Krabs? Come on, be honest.
I mean, I definitely sent in the names and email addresses and all that.
And Robbie Dodd was third.
I don't. All I know is I put myself first.
You did.
Of course I did.
Of course you did.
I sent it in. Why would I put myself first?
The progenitor of Project Success was put third.
Hey, it's all about who hits
Okay.
submit
And
and
then-
send on
That's
the
right.
email.
That's right.
Second thing.
Who's writing the blog?
Who's got a doctorate of these three? Was there EDD listed next to my name?
Oh, there wasn't. Oh,
Okay.
dagger. I should have done that. I definitely did not do that.
You know that was the first thing you looked at.
I did look at it.
I better have my proper suffix.
I have been stewing for 2 weeks. I did not send
You
a
did
text
not.
about it.
I'm glad you're bringing it up now.
I was waiting. Anyway, okay, I've got it out of my system.
that's so good.
I feel better.
So good.
Slighted. All right. What else? What kind of tweets do you have here?
Hold
about
on,
the
we got
show?
one more.
Okay, go ahead.
So as a result of that, there's something called the Marshall Memo, put together by someone named Kim Marshall, who sends out a weekly memo of the sort of biggest stories in education. So we were honored to be included in that as well. The AMLE article was included as part of his weekly roundup or his weekly memo.
Is there a link for that? Was there a way to tweet that, or is that just for subscribers to his memo? I think it was a subscription based thing.
He sent it to us, so yeah, but I didn't. I'll look into that. And
Okay.
if everybody else can get it,
Because there's some other good stories in there.
yeah, I looked at it. It was really good.
Yeah.
So
Thank you, Mr. Marshall.
Yeah, honored to be included in that.
Yep. And fellas, good job on the article, because we all three know. Aside from my testiness, you guys did most of the work, so it was very good.
Well, we couldn't have done it without your research.
Oh yeah, thank you. All right, what do you have, Mr.
Your Bandurian research.
My institutionalism. All right. Oh, okay. First part of the show's over.
That was it.
That was a Frito alarm.
It wasn't. It was go to bed soon.
Okay. All right. Tweets. Did we get any love in the Twitter sphere?
A lot.
What do you got?
We have some from Phyllis Fagel, friend of the pod.
Good friend of the pod.
Good friend. She said, thanks for sharing this with me, the article. And she was actually talking about our work with a team of central office and school administrators in Chappaqua, New York. Maybe she ran into Hillary Clinton. So glad you're continuing to share your great research with AMLE readers. And Dr. Dodd said, it was a very good tweet, I must say. Data is clear. Higher reading scores and grades, stronger social engagement in school, and improved perceptions of the classroom environment compared to departmentalization requires a mindset shift on how we can educate kids in middle schools. By the way, BT dubs, decades of research support it.
Should I have done the BT dubs in all caps?
Did you run out of
Yes,
did you run
you
out
should
of
have.
letters, or did you just or characters, or did you?
No, I thought BT
was
dubs
brevity.
was fairly cool.
It's good.
I like it. All
Yeah.
right. I was just curious as your mindset.
I came strong on that tweet. I don't tweet very much anymore, but it
was good.
I had to bring it.
I have some tweets stored, ready to go to publicize it again before February's out.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have some thoughts.
Oh,
Yeah, we can
thoughts.
we cannot let Project Success die.
Oh no, it's alive and well.
it's in AMLE magazine. It's
right.
never going anywhere.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr.
We got
Seitz.
some other feedback from folks about general listeners. We have Uniqua S. Smith, and they said, listening to my very first podcast with Ed's Not Dead so far, it's amazing, all caps.
Very nice.
And they listened to the Grading for Equity podcast with Joe Feldman, which
Yeah.
we really had a great time with Joe and had a great time having him on the show. Kaz, as usual, Mr. Kaz chimed in and said, fantastic episode, lots of great thoughts. And he said, I gotta see the Crable beard pics, please. I always thought Peter Crable was a poor man's Paul Rudd.
Oh, that's I
A bit
see
of a
that.
backhanded
A
compliment.
little bit.
Yeah, but that's overall that's a good one.
And he included an interview that's titled Paul Rudd interviews himself on Hot Ones.
Can you do slap in the bass?
Slap in the bass.
Biz.
Slap in the bass. And then finally there was another Twitter user said, Druin said, I know there are some great math ed podcasts out there, but what are your favorite must-hear this one episode? Looking for some PD on the go for my commute. For reference, I teach high school. And Carissa June, 28, said, very plainly, but succinctly, How to Make Math Teachers Mad by Ed's Not Dead PC.
Oh yeah, I love
That was a
that.
good
That was a
title.
good
That was a
one.
very
That
good
is
titled
good.
episode
That
as
was a
well.
good one.
Yeah.
Nice tweak. Carissa.
Yeah.
Have we ever thought about having Kaz just do all of our Twitter for us?
We should just put it, just pay him a
I
couple
mean,
bucks.
we really should.
He's-
honestly,
He's highly skilled.
He is.
He's good at Twitter.
Yeah.
And
He
can
actually
troll
tweets,
like the best
so
of them.
that's
Oh,
pretty
he
important
can
as well.
He can troll. I got a Twitter message or a DM
A DM.
A DM, as they say,
Yeah,
they
I think
say.
that's a direct message.
That's direct.
from a colleague, an old colleague,
yes.
no longer a colleague. Hi, Robbie. I'm in Jersey now. Accidentally came across your podcast when looking for Zaretta Hammond. Love Ed's Not Dead. Had no idea it was you until I started listening and thought, hey, I know this guy.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, that's Principal Connors. Thank you, Principal Connors,
great.
for finding us.
Yeah.
And I hope things are going well in Jersey.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else?
No, all things are good.
Did anybody troll us at all? I mean, we can't only do.
We don't tweet enough, I think, to get trolled. I think you got to really.
We're pretty careful about what we tweet.
And you got to be
too.
pretty absolutist in what you tweet to really enact the trolls.
But does that mean we haven't arrived? That no one has we haven't really had a Twitter storm?
Yeah, probably a little bit.
Is that a goal? Do we want to add to the vitriol that's on Twitter?
I don't know. I think I would use it as a little bit of a measuring stick.
Yeah.
You got to make statements like teachers are incompetent.
Yeah.
Then you really piss people off, and then you get 70,000 responses.
Never use textbooks.
How terrible you are.
All right, we'll stick with being vanilla. All right, let's move into Nevada just occurred. Bernie Sanders had a big win.
Yes.
Once again, I want to say to our listeners, we are not espousing any particular candidate.
We're holding off our official endorsement until after Super Tuesday.
Okay.
We're going to wait to see who pays us the most.
That's right.
Money.
We've had a good amount of time with President Trump and our friend Betsy DeVos, so we pretty much know where they stand on education.
Yeah.
But we're learning about where the Democratic candidates stand.
Yes.
You both are highly interested in politics. Mr. Krabs, what do you have for us from Chalkbeat?
So Chalkbeat has a great article, Election 2020, Where Do the Candidates Stand? And it breaks down by both candidates and issues. A nice 2020 cheat sheet about what the Democratic presidential candidates have said about education. So we got a nifty magical wheel that we're going to spin.
Oh, baby.
Yeah, we bought a big wheel.
So it's huge.
This is not a quiz, though, right?
No, it's not, but it's a huge wheel.
You're going to hear it spinning in the background, and then it's going to come up with a topic, and we're going to say what we think about it. Yeah, a brief introduction to what it is, and then whether we like it or don't.
It looks like
Robbie was kind enough to let us drag it into his basement.
It looks a lot like the spinning wheel in California tortilla that my daughter likes to spin.
It does.
Where you get the free 2 tacos.
We might have borrowed it from there. Nobody was looking.
It's impressive.
We might not be getting it back.
All right.
All right, ready?
All right, let's go.
Nice. Tinny.
That's quite the
very
robust spinning wheel. All right, what is it, Mr. Krabs? What
Teacher
did it land
pay.
Teacher pay.
Teacher pay. That's
All right,
that's always a winner.
Pull it up.
Yeah, so generally...
Teacher pay for $500.
I'll take it. An hour.
We all know that the candidates want teachers to be paid more. That's common ground, right?
But I think this has to do more with setting a national minimum standard for teacher pay. So what do we think? Should teachers be paid a minimum salary nationwide?
I'm for it. I think Bernie Sanders, for example, has that teacher salary should all start at least $60,000, which is a great start. But what about teachers in major metro areas where the cost of living is super, super high?
I think they would still be able to pay them more.
Sure.
So I would paying teachers more encourage more people to come into the workforce.
Okay, so let me ask a question with a question. Answer a question with a question. Does $60,000 make it seem like something I want to go into as a high school
for teachers
college
that are currently
student?
making $27,000?
That is
I
true.
would say
Good
yes,
point.
it does.
But I do love how candidates just decide what teachers should be paid.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
We give an arbitrary number.
Yeah, I think a teacher's worth $60,000 a year.
That sounds good.
Sounds right. That sounds good enough.
Yeah.
That was Bernie's idea. Buttigieg does differentiate a little bit. He thinks in his K-12 plan that teacher pay should be raised, especially for teachers in highly impacted Title I schools. So he's got a little bit of a different approach. I wouldn't call it merit pay, but it is pay for working in schools with higher ed loads.
I wonder also if this goes into the equation of teacher pay, because when you think about what do teachers ask for or want the most?
Money. No.
Other than money.
Okay, what?
Time.
Time.
And time costs money.
Yep.
You give a teacher an extra planning period, and it costs money to do that, and staffing. So is that a part of the equation, and should that be part of the discussion?
Yeah, I mean,
or is that too nuanced for?
I don't think. I don't think
pretty
anybody's
nuanced.
allowed more detailed plan aside from just let's pay teachers more money. Now, to play devil's advocate, I mean, do you really want the federal government getting involved in however, I don't know how many teachers there are nationwide, millions upon millions, in dictating minimum pay standards.
Why not? We have a federal minimum wage
I don't know.
that we haven't raised in 30 years.
That's true.
Not 30 years, actually, 15 years.
All right. Let's do it. Let's pay them all 60
I mean,
grand.
I think there's broad agreement that
What's the floor?
teachers are underpaid.
Yes.
There's no
Yeah.
there's no question about that. How you do it? I mean, I don't see anything incredibly innovative here. I'd like to see none of these candidates have mentioned having the private sector have any skin in paying teachers more.
Interesting.
That's true.
Like having corporations pay for it?
Why not?
Yeah. I mean, in France, in,
Public education tax.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Teacher tax.
in a lot of countries, in France, they have if you have a company or you build a building, you have to put in public art.
Yeah.
You have to pay for installation of art.
Every one of these candidates cites the Fed as the source of increased funding for teacher pay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put it on corporations.
I'd like to see something.
Love it.
Let's do the next one.
Creative.
All right.
They want the well-educated, informed
Yeah.
workforce.
Got to pay a little. You got to pay to get what you want.
Invest.
I'm on board.
All right.
All right, round 2.
What are we going to do if we get this in the same one twice? Get it over and over again.
Spin it really hard.
Kill the segment, eh?
I've been lifting, so
Actually read. Got to work on our microphone setup here.
funding.
Oh, funding.
All right, let's go to the funding tab.
Snoozer.
Snoozer.
So,
Oh, well, let's look at Joe Biden's speech here. Biden's education plan calls for tripling Title I funding for schools serving students from low-income families, and he said, quote, "That's not a hard lift," he said in a January speech. "They give away more to racehorses." That's a good
I
Joe
don't know what
Biden
that
quote.
means.
I don't know what that means.
I
either.
think generally the sort of the consistent message across many candidates. I'm looking here. You got Buttigieg, you got Biden, you got Sanders.
Raise Title I funding.
Raise Title I funding.
But it's also, what is the equation for how schools are funded? And right now it's by property taxes.
Right.
And we talked about that about California.
Bloomberg says go income, which is different.
Oh,
Yeah, Bloomberg calls for a 5% income tax.
over 5 million.
Yeah.
for every state, or is that federal?
No, that's I don't know.
Because if all the billionaires are
5% tax on incomes over 5 million. So I would assume that would be individual taxpayers.
Yeah.
Right.
But then I'm surprised he hasn't thrown the corporations in there. I mean, that's where you could throw the big boys in.
Yeah. And going back to your point about what teachers want and wanting more time, I do think, if we're looking at specifically Title I schools, increasing funding to whether it's get more teachers more planning time or having smaller class sizes, or I know it's not infrastructure, that's a separate topic, but putting more money into crumbling schools.
wraparound services.
Right. For schools with kids that are highly impacted, experience trauma, etc. Generally, I'm in favor of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
What would you say teachers want more time, for example, more planning time, or lower class sizes?
I would say my first inclination is lower class sizes, because you're already stuck with usually 5 or 6 classes. I shouldn't say stuck with. You're already assigned 5 or 6 classes. You know what you're going to get with that. But if you have 32 kids per class versus 20, I've talked to many teachers who would just rather have more classes and have less kids in them.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be curious about,
Especially if it's the same prep.
I don't know about research on more planning time.
Yeah.
I'm a little skeptical.
Do you
of
think
that.
it's okay to specifically direct the funds towards Title I schools, or should it be more evenly distributed amongst all schools?
I do think at times more and more that there's a place for paying teachers more who elect to work where there is a heavier lift to support kids, where there are more needs pressing down on communities and schools. I mean, we know that's a non-starter with most unions.
Right.
But I think our pay model, the classic teacher pay scale, is probably about as old as departmentalizing and having bells. Don't you think?
Yeah.
I would argue we know the measurements to say whether a school is a challenging place for not only learning but also teaching. So we should be paying those particular teachers more, and we should be giving them more time to plan appropriate and targeted instruction for kids.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we have to incentivize the profession a little bit. I mean, when a doctor graduates from medical school or finishes their internship or whatever you call it, what's it called?
Their residency.
Residency.
When they finish their practices,
their practicum. I mean,
yeah, they can go into private practice, or they can go into a community health clinic.
Absolutely,
And,
they go out and
5, 10, whatever.
They sell their
income.
services,
Yeah.
and one of their considerations, I'm sure, is money.
Yeah.
Along with professional satisfaction and who they're going to work with and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Pete Buttigieg says teachers should be paid like doctors. I don't quite know what that means, but
it's a very easy analogy for people to think about.
Yeah. So anyway,
People
all
think
right,
that they make
spin
a
the
lot of
wheel.
money. All right,
Spin
here we
the
go.
wheel.
I'm a little embarrassed about my internship. That's embarrassing.
Doctors have
And
internships.
my brother's a
I
doctor.
think that's pretty clear. He did his internship, and
All right. Vouchers, baby. Oh, baby.
everybody's pretty universally against vouchers.
Yeah.
This idea has really fallen out of favor, pretty much universally, I think, across anybody in the Democratic field. But with that being said, vouchers do exist in D.C., one of the most liberal cities in
true.
America. I think the data is somewhat mixed.
And New York City
In New York City.
with Mike Bloomberg.
Okay. I'm not sure about New York, but I think it's pretty mixed in D.C. about whether it actually makes any difference. Our vouchers, and many states have voted down. I think Nevada was the most recent one within the last year or two have voted down vouchers. But then there's other states, I think like Indiana, who
Yes.
offer vouchers.
Yeah.
Should we allow states to do vouchers if they want to, or should we just say nobody does vouchers? None of our public school funds are going to be going to private schools for any reason.
And I did misspeak. He had expressed sympathy for the idea that it wasn't actually introduced in New York City.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the right answer to that. I think it's a delicate balance between what we allow states to do to basically incentivize quality education, but not allowing it to the point where it's just privatizing or allowing for private schools to flourish under public dollars.
What about the child who, for some reason, can't get their needs met in a public school?
I mean, that happens now with students who are receiving special education services, and
Yep.
if they've shown, through their own analyses, their own doctors, that the school isn't meeting their needs, then the school is obligated to pay for it.
Yeah,
So
you're missing a link there.
So
and lawyers.
Yes,
So is that okay?
They got to have lawyers.
Or do we just want to cut vouchers totally out?
I don't
for
know.
all
I don't
reasons?
know the answer to that. I think at some point there are certain needs of certain students that are so great and so profound that perhaps it's not possible for the public charge to do so. But that goes against the whole point of free and appropriate public education for all.
Yep.
I'm going to come strong and say that I don't see a place for vouchers.
Anywhere.
No.
All right.
I don't, and it's so funny how political cycles work. 3 years ago when we started the show, we spent a significant amount of time talking about vouchers because Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, they were a principle of her
Yep.
of her approach to education, and I mean, talk of vouchers has largely died down over the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's really
But
fallen out.
I guess what you're saying about the special needs of a student, I never thought about that as a voucher, but I guess it is.
I'm just thinking about the most far outlying cases.
Right.
I would venture to say, Democrat or Republican, I wonder what percentage of Americans really support vouchers.
They want their neighborhood school.
Absolutely.
They want the school that's closest to their house.
Yeah. I mean, there was research done decades ago that showed that when you ask someone about their neighborhood school, they usually speak fairly positively about it. When you ask about public education as a whole, in general, they're highly critical. So, I mean, I don't think vouchers are. Now, charters are another issue.
Yeah. Well, maybe that'll come up. Let's do one or two more.
I hope not.
Playing a video game here. Yeah, read it for us there, Case.
We already hit that.
Do you see the?
We already hit that
Do
one.
you see the flickering light in the studio?
Yeah,
It's very creepy.
We have a malfunction.
We got a poltergeist.
Studio light. What do you got?
All right, college costs.
Oh, so this is a big one. So, in terms of college costs, there's quite a few ideas and plans out there. So, I think the starting premise is that college costs way too much money.
Yes.
Which I would tend to agree with. And then, so what to do about it? So, there's some talk of limiting what you can charge, but really the biggest and or most radical ideas have to do with free college.
Yeah.
Whether that's 2 years of free community college, whether that's on the further end of the spectrum, whether that's 4 years of free public university,
Right.
and then some variances in between of the increase of Pell Grants and other federal aid to heavily subsidize money going to colleges.
Right.
So where are we on those issues, on any of them? So let's start with, I guess, free community college.
Check.
Do it.
Check.
Yep.
Done and done.
Done.
Check.
Okay. What about free 4-year colleges?
Yes.
Free 4-year public universities, I should say.
Check. I agree.
I'm not there.
You're not quite there.
No,
what
I'm
are
not.
your reservations?
I'd like to. I think we have universal agreement that college is too expensive.
Yes.
How much is it to go to Drexel University for an entire year?
Is that
Drexel.
Yeah.
private?
Yeah, Drexel's
private.
Yeah. I'm gonna guess 65K.
Crabs?
55.
70 grand.
Okay, so I was close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's outrageous.
Yeah, I mean those are private schools. They're they it's pay to learn at those schools. They're not getting the same kinds of state subsidies that
Right.
that state universities are getting. I guess what I'd like to see again is just more creative ways to defray the cost of 4-year schooling.
Right.
I again here just see the Fed paying more. And
Drexel still costs $72,000, but the federal government just pays whatever X amount of that.
correct. I mean, I don't see any interesting kinds of partnerships between, again, the private sector with colleges. I mean, there are a lot of very rich people that get buildings and academic programs named after themselves at colleges. And I'm sure there are all kinds of scholarships that the affluent put in place at universities to help students.
Yes.
I'd like to see more of that on a larger scale.
Yeah.
I just, I mean, there is a limit to what the government can do to subsidize school.
Bloomberg has a bit of a carrot and I would say carrot and stick, but really just carrot approach, where offering some sort of federal matching dollars to states that agree to limit tuition increases. Now, it doesn't appear that it talks about walking back tuition to a more reasonable level. It seems like it stops it where it is, and then just controls for inflation. But that's also another idea of giving money to schools to keep it, quote, reasonable.
The other thing that I'd throw into the expense of college is the competitiveness of college. I mean, those colleges, as they've gotten more expensive, it's gotten incredibly hard for kids to get in, even to state schools.
Yes.
I mean, take University of Maryland, for example. It's gotten to be really tough to get in. A lot of that is based on just the metrics that they want to show for their incoming freshman class.
Yeah.
whereas you can get in as a transfer student much easier.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's not just the price that keeps kids away. It's that, I feel like colleges are serving the affluent more than they ever have. And I think less of a broad cross-section of Americans, achievement-wise, are able to access school.
Yeah.
And another an interesting idea that Buttigieg has brought up is only free public college for students whose families make $100,000 a year or less. And his quote is, "I just don't believe it makes sense to ask working class families to subsidize the children of billionaires."
And I take contention with that, because then why don't we do that for public libraries and public schools and other public services that we provide? We provide it for everybody. A public good is a public good for the public.
Make a little class warfare.
And it creates class warfare, and you know what? It might make it's not going to be easy to pass when you talk about class warfare, because if you talk about it for everybody, it's for everybody.
Right. When my brother graduated from high school in 1979, he's almost 60. My mom would not let him apply to the University of Maryland because she thought it lacked rigor.
Yeah.
I mean, the joke was back then you could get into Maryland with a 2.5, maybe a 3.0. But I just think back to those times to think about the number of kids that were able to go to Maryland that were maybe marginal students or average students that benefited, who having a 4-year degree made all the difference in their lives. We have kids that can't get into schools like that. Sometimes I get a little prickly about having a state institution that my kid potentially cannot get into,
right,
if they're not a super high achiever.
Right.
And it's meant to be for
the citizens of the state.
Right.
So,
right.
I mean, anyway.
What can you do without a college degrgy? In terms of increasing your lifetime earnings and increasing your family's wealth.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to change it up a little bit. Just one last kind of point that has not come up yet that is, I think, fairly contentious, has to deal with the cancellation of student debt for any number of Americans. Now, some is, Bernie's for cancellation of all student debt. Elizabeth Warren, I think, has a little bit more of a nuanced plan where it's not just wipe the slate clean. But the contention that I've heard is people are like, well, I had to pay for my school. Why should other people get it wiped off and get the slate wiped clean? I mean, how do you think about the cancellation of student debt, which can be extremely crippling?
I think it's a selfish view of looking at new progressive legislation.
I feel like I'm a little stuck here because I might be the last generation that didn't incur a tremendous amount of student debt. You guys are from a different generation. I mean, the millennials are often, they're the generation that has been saddled with onerous debt.
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't have kids yet. So I don't have kids in college yet. So I might feel differently 3 years from now.
Right.
When my kid has to take out loans.
Yeah.
Do you have any feelings about you paying for debt and then college and, sorry, I said that horribly. You paid for college in the prospect of others in generations to come not having to. Does that impact you in any way?
It does not impact me. And I was fortunate that I had a dad that paid for my school. Mm-hmm. A lot of kids don't have that. So I wouldn't hate on subsidizing their school, making it easier for them, because I know that instead of paying off loans, I was able to save up money for a down payment on a house,
right,
and become a homeowner pretty quick.
And I spent 10 years of my really almost 10 years after college paying off my debt.
Yeah,
where
I didn't have
I'm spending $600 a month that could go elsewhere.
And the tough thing I think about it too is you're asking an 18-year-old to make a decision, incurring, 10, 20, 30,000 up to $300,000 of debt.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine you're 22 and you're $300,000 in debt.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
That's insane.
No, I agree.
It's insane.
But isn't the core issue the price? I mean, the debt, they wouldn't,
because it's so high.
I mean, they wouldn't incur the debt if it wasn't so expensive.
Right. And there's a big difference between $50,000 in debt, which is not minor,
right,
and $300,000 in debt.
Yeah, I don't even know what I would do if it was 300. I
I'd run away.
I remember looking at my bills, being like, "I'm never going to pay it off
Ever.
I'm never."
Well, I mean, that's why there's all this research now on the cost benefit analysis of college, whether it's worth it.
Right.
I mean, are you gonna? That's why people push certification programs and 2-year degrees
Yeah.
and such, because
Yeah.
the 4-year contract is a freaking mortgage.
Yeah.
That could
It's a
last
lifetime commitment
Correct.
that prevents you from doing other things like buying a house.
Exactly.
All right, let's do one more.
One more.
Alrighty.
Okay, this is like not radio. The waiting
All right.
for
The weighted, yeah. We gotta-
Education secretary.
dead air. Education secretary.
Education
That's a good one.
This is a nice, easy one.
I like this one. All right, what is the most radical proposal for education secretary from these candidates?
Well, I think many candidates have come out and said, specifically in retaliation or in response to Betsy DeVos, that they will hire somebody who has been a teacher and or educator. I don't know if it's public educator and or educators. They want somebody who has had skin in the game and has been in the classroom.
But come to the chase. They say they want a teacher to be
teacher.
the Secretary of Education.
Yes, they do.
I mean, that's such a novel idea. I mean, that's
Hey,
Wasn't the
it's,
first
it's having the
one a
employees
teacher or
on the
something?
board.
the what?
It's having employees on the board.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty meh on the whole idea. I'm
Nah.
I think what it's going to end up being is, an Elizabeth Warren type person who spent 5 years in the classroom, and then for their first 5 years of their career, and then went on to have an entire other career. Is that in the spirit of hiring a teacher as your Secretary of Education?
I mean, at the end of the day, you're managing just billions of dollars of federal funding, right?
Yeah, you're a bureaucratic manager.
You are.
With a nice desk.
But you're also going into public schools, supposed to be going into public schools, visiting teachers, talking about their issues, finding ways that you can solve the issues that our public schools face from the federal government.
I mean, you are a political appointee, so a large amount of your role is political.
Yeah.
I mean, you're representing a platform for the chief executive. And I think there are certainly plenty of charismatic, Pied Piper kinds of teachers out there that could do that.
Yeah.
And are smart enough to, run an agency. God knows. Well, I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, I mean, I'm all for, I'd hate to see the Peter principle come into play where somebody's promoted to their level of incompetence. But why not?
Yeah. I guess the optics of it would
But why
be
not?
good.
Why not a principal?
Why not a principal?
You call yourself an educator. You are a public educator.
Okay, was that like?
It wasn't
that
a
a
dig.
dig?
No, it wasn't a
Okay, I
dig.
couldn't
It was
tell.
like, I call you, we're educators. When I talk about the podcast, we are 3 educators talking about education.
We are.
It's not limited. You're saying just to teachers.
Just because you're not in front of kids every day does not mean you're not a teacher.
Yeah. I mean, I think it definitely has the potential. It could be cool. And as you said, there's probably plenty of people who have experience both in the classroom, in a school, and then, managing some sort of organization.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and in this day and age, with your gen, with millennials, who I find to be really multi-talented and skilled in a wide array of kinds of things because you're so good at getting information. I think somebody could do it pretty easily.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's
All right.
do it.
All right. Well, there you go.
Oligarchy in this Department of Education. Ed's not dead oligarchy.
I mean, it has to be teachers are leaders
Yeah.
at their core. Mm-hmm. And, I think any superior leader could lead that agency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right.
All right.
It's the end of that segment.
I know. I guess you're giving me the look.
I'm giving you the look,
All
yeah.
right. All right, folks. Don't go away. The big segment is coming up. Natalie Wexler, the author of The Knowledge Gap, is going to be joining us on END. We'll be back in a minute. Thanks. Natalie Wexler is a DC-based education journalist focusing on literacy and the so-called achievement gap. She's the author of The Knowledge Gap, The Hidden Cause of America's Broken Education System and How to Fix It, which was released in August 2019. She's also the co-author of The Writing Revolution, Advancing Thinking Through Writing in All Subjects and Grades, a step-by-step guide to using the instructional method developed by Dr. Judith Hochman. She's also a contributor on education to Forbes.com and the author of 3 novels. It's very appropriate that we have Natalie on the show because she responded to a tweet of ours way back where she said, not sure the podcast really captures the argument of my Knowledge Gap book. Coming 8/6 would be happy to explain on air. And
here we are.
Now we have her, and clearly all 3 of us lack knowledge. So you're here to fill in the holes. Yes. Thanks for coming on the show, Natalie. We really appreciate it.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me and following up on my tweet.
Yes. All right. So let's jump in, and we're gonna ask you to give us some context because probably there are some folks in our audience that haven't read the book. Let's start off by hearing about what served as the primary inspiration for writing The Knowledge Gap. And can you tell our listeners a little bit about what the Knowledge Gap is?
Sure. Well, it's, the title is kind of a play on the term achievement gap or sometimes opportunity gap. It's called really a test score gap. And about 10 years ago now, I got very interested in education and in the so-called achievement gap. And why has it been so difficult to narrow it? We've made some gradual progress, but really there's some research that says it really hasn't significantly narrowed the income-based, the gap between kids from the higher and lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. That really hasn't narrowed in maybe 40, 50 years, according to some scholars. And when I started looking into this, both as a journalist and sort of, an education reformer, I was on the board of a charter school. What thought and what everybody was telling me was the real problem was high school. High school's, the toughest nut to crack, and that's where the real problems are. But what I stumbled across, and I don't know that I would have figured this out myself, was that elementary school, which everybody had told me was really the bright spot in education, where the scores seemed to gradually be getting better and the gap seemed to be gradually narrowing, that was really where the root of a lot of the problems that become apparent in high school lies. And what I mean by that is the way we teach reading in particular. And we spend an enormous amount of time teaching reading, and most of that time, hours every week, is really spent on what are called reading comprehension skills and strategies. And those are things like finding the main idea or making inferences. And the theory is that kids just need to practice these skills on texts that are pretty easy for them to read on their own and that are on a random variety of topics, and that if they just get good at finding the main idea, then down the road when they get to high school they'll be able to find the main idea of any textbook that's put in front of them, or really even at the end of the school year when they have reading passages on standardized tests, that they'll be able to apply this skill of finding the main idea. And what I discovered was that cognitive scientists have known for a long time that something like finding the main idea is not a generally applicable skill, that comprehension has much more to do with how much background knowledge and vocabulary you have relating to whatever topic you're trying to read about than it does with some general skill. So if you know a lot about baseball or molecular biology and you read something about it, it's going to be a lot easier for you to find the main idea than if you don't know anything about it. And so this focus on these reading comprehension skills, which has intensified over the last 20 years with the advent of high-stakes standardized reading tests, we've really been shooting ourselves in the foot, and this is a large part of the explanation for why we haven't made any progress in narrowing the gap, because the kids who come to school with more of the kind of knowledge and vocabulary that helps with reading comprehension, they are picking up that knowledge from home, generally because they have more highly educated families, and the other kids rely on school for that kind of knowledge, and they're actually the least likely to get it there. And so what we've been doing, so the kids who have more knowledge and vocabulary, they do better on the tests. They tend to come from wealthier families in our society, and they get better. They acquire more and more knowledge every year they stay in school, because knowledge also helps you retain related knowledge. And meanwhile, the kids who are relying on school for that knowledge and are not getting it fall farther and farther behind every year. And it really falls apart in high school, because that's where the assumptions about background knowledge are the greatest, and that's where the gaps are the greatest.
So, and I appreciate you bringing this piece up to us, because we were talking earlier off the pod about some of your arguments in the book, and you talk a lot about content-rich versus skills-rich classrooms. And so we do have a lot of listeners who are teachers and folks who are in the education system, but can you break down a little bit about examples between what you see between, or what you observe between, content-rich and skills-rich?
Sure. And one of the things I did for the book was I followed 2 early elementary classrooms through a school year, and that was kind of an afterthought, but it really, for me, was one of the most illuminating pieces of research I did, and I hope it's illuminating for readers as well, both inside and outside the education world. So one of the classrooms I followed was using the standard skills-focused approach to comprehension. And before I go any further, I do want to say that there are 2 components basically to reading. There's decoding, like phonics, and there's comprehension. And as far as decoding goes, like sounding out words, that really does need to be taught as a set of skills. Often it's not,
right,
but it should be.
Right.
Whereas comprehension is often generally taught as a set of skills, and it shouldn't be. But this skills-focused classroom, is typical of others that I've been in, where there may be a skill of the week.
Right.
And the teacher models that skill for students, choosing a book that not for its topic or its content, but for how well it seems to lend itself to demonstrating the skill of comparing and contrasting, or determining the author's purpose, or whatever the skill of the week is. And then the kids scatter essentially to practice the skill on books that have been determined to be at their individual reading levels, which could be years below their grade levels. And of course, if you're in 6th grade, you might be directed to a basket of books at like a 2nd grade level. And the idea is you'll somehow move up the ladder of text complexity if you just keep reading those books that are easy for you to read.
Right.
And there is no evidence that actually happens. The content-focused classrooms, which may be less familiar to your listeners who are elementary teachers, because there are many fewer of them, there are now like 6 different content-rich elementary literacy curricula. I happened to observe a classroom that was using one called Core Knowledge Language Arts, which is the oldest of them. And when I was doing my research, it was pretty much the only game in town. And in those, Core Knowledge Language Arts has some characteristics in common with other content-rich curricula, which is that, for one thing, it's organized by topic rather than by skill. And kids will spend at least a couple of weeks on a particular topic, and they'll listen to the teacher reading aloud from texts or books that they themselves couldn't yet read independently. And that's really important, because eventually they're going to need to grapple with complex written language, which is very different from spoken language. And they need to get used to that vocabulary, that syntax, through listening. And also, that's a much more efficient way for them to acquire sophisticated concepts, knowledge of those concepts, because listening comprehension exceeds reading comprehension. And in the content area, certainly, it's been found on average through middle school. So, we shouldn't stop reading to kids once they've learned to decode, because they still can take in more sophisticated information through listening than through their own reading.
Did you ever read the Read Aloud Handbook by Jim Trelease?
No, I've seen it. I know I've heard about it.
Right.
No, I haven't read it.
So let me. I'm interested about this selection of texts in classrooms, because I hear you talk about the skills-rich classroom, but it seemed to me, aren't you just kind of isolating that the teachers are making instructional decisions that are lead to kids not being in dense or rigorous enough texts. It's not really a matter of the texts themselves. Because, I mean, if I agree with you, teachers probably spend too much time with kids at the instructional level versus, to quote Lev Vygotsky, really challenging them with support. But I'm not sure is it a text specific thing?
Well, I'd say it's a topic specific thing and a text specific thing. So it's part of the problem is that kids are not being exposed really to complex text if their reading levels are significantly below grade level.
But did you see those texts in those skills-rich classrooms? Were they there? The kids just weren't accessing them based on the teacher's decision?
You're talking about the skills-focused classrooms.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there were texts at a range of reading levels. If you've got a classroom where everybody's reading below grade level, I don't know how far up they go, but the kids would be restricted. They weren't allowed to, if they were level, L, they weren't allowed to read a level P or Q book. It was, the assumption was that it would be frustrating for them. And it might be, but the thing is, not necessarily. The other thing that's important here is this random variety of either fiction or topics that are random doesn't give kids an opportunity to acquire the information and the knowledge that will make it easier for them to understand more complex text. So it's not just that, it's partly that written text has this more complicated syntax and vocabulary, but it's also that the more background knowledge you have on a topic, the more you've been able to develop, the easier it will be for you to read more complex text on that topic, because you will recognize the concepts, you'll recognize the vocabulary, and you'll have an easier time making sense of it.
Well, and I feel like most of my experience has been in middle school, and when we have students coming in at sixth grade, when Common Core came through, our curriculum changed to the analysis of primary sources, which is I guess you would consider it a skill, being able to analyze primary sources, but they are learning content through the analysis of those primary sources, which I would argue is a pretty rigorous set of skills to learn. What are your thoughts on those social studies, those historical thinking skills?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, that does sound like they're actually acquiring some knowledge and content and learning at the same time that they're learning how to deal with primary sources. But it is also, it's similar. If you're handed a primary source about, the 16th century, France, and you don't know anything about 16th century France, it's going to be harder for you to make sense of that primary source than if it's something you do know about.
Sure.
Background knowledge is going to enter into it no matter what.
And I totally take your point on that. That was an argument that a lot of our my colleagues had about at the time was, what if they don't know the content around it? And really the job of the teacher was really to not only just give it to them cold, but provide that context as needed. Because we were in sixth grade, we were analyzing primary sources from like ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. So there really is there really was. I mean, almost every kid to a T didn't have that context. You'd have a random kid here and there who nerded out on ancient Egypt in fifth and fourth grade.
Right.
But I take your point. I guess I'm just trying to figure out, like, are some of these issues mitigated by the teacher being able to skillfully provide context as needed?
Well, yes, but I would say better than that is, rather than putting even a skill like analyzing primary sources in the foreground, rather than putting any skill in the foreground, I would say it makes more sense to put the content in the foreground, and the skills, develop naturally, more or less, from, we're learning about ancient Egypt. Here's a primary source. Let's try to make sense of this primary source. And then, the next unit, we're learning about Mesopotamia or whatever, ancient Greece. Here's another primary source.
Right.
Remember what we did with the last primary? We can do something similar here, but you're also learning about ancient, the main thing you're doing is learning about ancient civilizations, not learning this sort of, it's not really a generally applicable skill of reading primary sources. There's some things that you need to know about that, but if you don't have the context, you can't exercise, you can't apply the skill.
Okay. I take your point. I suppose my thought was if you're teaching them the skill of analyzing primary sources, that you would hopefully open up the door for kids to be able to access really any kind of historical knowledge, because that's what history is based on, primary sources largely.
Well, yes, but even I have a background in history myself, but it's, if I looked at a primary source from a place and a time that I didn't know anything about, even though I have analyzed primary sources, I might not be able to do it.
Sure.
Because I just wouldn't have the knowledge to do it.
Switching gears, Natalie, I'm the Gen X geezer of the group here. And so Edie Hirsch was really popular when I was becoming a teacher back in the early 90s. I'm just curious, did a reviewer referred to your book as The Lost Children of Edie Hirsch? I don't know if you saw that.
I did.
Yeah. I thought it was kind of cool. Did cultural literacy have any impact on your thinking about the knowledge gap?
Oh, of course. I mean, I think, I certainly read maybe all of Edie Hirsch's books, but, when I was researching this book, I hadn't, I'd heard of cultural literacy vaguely, but I think like many people, I didn't really know what it was about.
Right.
And I think it was, you say it was really popular when you were doing your teacher training. And my impression was that it was quite unpopular among like schools of education. That it was notorious and it was condemned by a lot of people because it was really misinterpreted to say we really need to emphasize dead white males and Eurocentric.
Right.
Hirsch did say that to some extent, but not because he thought dead white males were better than other people or that Western civilization was better than other civilizations, but because he actually empirically looked at what is the knowledge that is assumed, in a newspaper article or magazine article or whatever. And it turns out, it's probably somewhat less so 30 years later, but it turns out that a lot of the knowledge that's assumed actually has to do with Western civilization and allusions to Western culture. And really what Edie Hirsch was concerned about was that some people in our society have gained that knowledge and others have been denied access to it.
Right.
But that message kind of got lost.
Well, and you're I think you're partially accurate. I lived through that era as an educator, and he was reviled, but it also, cultural literacy came out also at the height of the phonics whole language wars. And I was trained as a whole language teacher. So I did find his thinking very interesting. I didn't agree with some of it. And then it lent itself to, the standards-based movement and even, I don't know if you looked at assessments like the standards of the SOLs in Virginia and what Maryland did, which were two very different approaches to knowledge. But that was kind of what came out of that Edie Hirsch moment.
Yes, although Hirsch he said to me,
what did he say?
He is sometimes identified as the father of the standards of learning in Virginia, but he denied paternity.
Oh, he did. Well,
they got so watered down.
Yeah, well, they've been around for a long time. They've lasted, but I'm sure they have been watered down. Anyway, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I just wanted to back up to kind of some of the early childhood reading and how generally we teach kids to read. And I'm certainly not an expert on early childhood education.
You're a parent, though.
I'm a parent, yeah. So I'm living through some of it. I have a 6-year-old who's in the process of learning to read, and so I guess the question is, you'd mentioned that reading is a mix of phonics and decoding. So, 2 parts is, one, do you have any thoughts on early childhood reading, phonics versus whole language, or some mix, or anything else? And then, second, when or at what age, would you identify the kids switch from learning to read to reading to learn?
Okay. Those are good questions. And I would say that I am, this, it's not just me, that the science is quite clear on the superiority of phonics as an instructional method for decoding. It's not just phonics. There's phonemic awareness, which is hearing the individual speech sounds in words, which is very important. And then there's phonics is basically connecting those sounds or to letters, or blending those sounds into letter form combinations. And then there's fluency, which you have to be able to read at an appropriate rate to make. Otherwise, you just are not getting the meaning. So you have to practice that. Those are all things that should definitely, in my view, and that many scientists, be taught explicitly and systematically. Not that every kid will need that kind of instruction. I mean, there are kids, maybe as many as half, who will learn to read kind of no matter what, but at least to some extent. But that means maybe 50% or a bit more won't. And those do tend to be kids from less educated families. And even some of the ones who manage to learn will not become really fluent decoders without systematic instruction. So that, I feel, is, definitely important. But the comprehension side, it has to be handled differently, not as an explicitly taught set of skills. And it has to be, this relates to your learning to read and then reading to learn point. There's some truth to that, because you do have to learn to decode before you can use reading to acquire knowledge. But the acquiring knowledge part should not wait until after a kid has learned to decode. As I mentioned before, kids can take in a lot of sophisticated information and vocabulary and knowledge through listening, even before they've fully learned to decode. And it's really important to start building their knowledge then. Kids from more educated families acquiring knowledge, and even kind of academic or quasi-academic knowledge very young. They can do it. All kids are capable of that. It's just that a lot of kids don't get that opportunity, and that's what schools really need to do. So starting in kindergarten, if not before, kids can handle historical topics. There's a widespread belief that those are developmentally inappropriate below a certain age, but there's no evidence for that. So you can read them. History can be presented very engagingly as a series of stories, and kids love stories. So that's the kind of thing that they, this learn to read to learn dichotomy overlooks the fact that part of learning to read is acquiring knowledge.
And I as a social studies teacher in the first year of middle school, I certainly found that a lot of students came with not a lot of background knowledge coming into school about history because of the No Child Left Behind era of testing and the hyper focus on reading and math to the detriment of history. Yeah. Well, Natalie, it has been a pleasure having you on the show, and I don't know how often you listen, but whenever I can sneak one into the podcast, I try to get a quiz in to our guests.
And I want you to know, Natalie, that I usually try to kill the quiz, but he insists.
I insist.
Here you go.
And so your book called The Knowledge Gap talks about a greater focus on content. We have to end our time with a quiz on some content before you go. So, Natalie, you going
to quiz me?
Yeah, that's right. So, Natalie, you are the author of The Knowledge Gap. Pick it up, The Hidden Cause of America's Broken Education System and How to Fix It. But we want to know what you know about minding the gap. The London Underground, the London subway system. I have 3 questions for you, and if you get 2 out of the 3 correct, we'll send you some END swag.
All right, I'll do my best.
You ready?
I spent a fair amount of time in London.
All right. It's multiple choice. All right, ready?
Okay.
Number 1, how many trips are made each year on the London Underground? Is it A, 1.3 billion, B, 200 million, or C, 4 billion?
Oh, my God. What was the first one?
1.3 billion.
Well, I'll go with that one because it's in between the other two.
That is correct. Each year, about 1.3 billion journeys are made. The busiest station is in the network is Waterloo, which sees about 100.3 million passengers per year.
I want to point out that was not based on Natalie's knowledge. That was a test-taking skill that she utilized. I just want to point that out.
Split the difference.
Split the difference. Right. Number 2, you're doing great. How long does the average Londoner spend in the Underground each year? Is it A, 4 days, B, 11.5 days, or C, 20 days?
Those are all depressing, by the way.
Yeah. Boy. I'm going to go with 4 days.
That's actually incorrect. It's 11.5 days.
I should have split the difference again.
I've seen a pattern.
5.2 of those days are in the actual tunnels. And it's not clear if it's like when they're stopped or if they're waiting for another train. Anyway. All right, you have one more.
A lot of pressure on this last one. Yeah.
People have left a lot of weird things on the London Underground trains. Which of the following are actual items left on the train and collected by the Lost Property Office? Is it A, an outboard motor, B, 3 dead bats, C, a harpoon gun, D, a stuffed eagle, E, breast implants, F, false teeth, G, a 4-foot-tall Mickey Mouse,
That's a lot of choices.
H, 6 full-sized mannequins, I, an urn containing a dead man's ashes, or J, all of the above.
Well, not that I can remember all of it, so I'm just going to go with J, all of it.
That is correct.
Yeah.
That is correct. All of the above.
She get
I had a feeling.
one or two. Did you?
She got 2 out of the 3.
Very nice.
The harpoon was mine, by the way. Been looking for that thing.
All right, Natalie, where can our listeners find the book, and where can they find you online?
Well, the book, my website is nataliewexler.com, so that's pretty easy to remember.
Yep.
And, the book is at all the usual places, I guess, and it's, Amazon, etc. So, I hope people will check it out.
Okay. All right. Well, it's been great having you on the show. Thanks for being a good sport. And the book is tremendous, and it's really thought-provoking. We have this discussion all the time about content versus skills, and so it was right on time having you. So thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure. I really had a good time.
All right. Take care. Thanks, Natalie.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Welcome back to Ed's Not Dead. We're still here. Once again, thanks to Natalie Wexler for joining us. It was a good interview.
It was. I was glad to have her on the show. Short notice, and I appreciate her.
She stepped up.
Her coming out.
When
to
did you
talk
book?
with us.
When did you book her?
I emailed her on Monday. Wait, what is today?
Tuesday.
I think I emailed her 2 days ago, and she got back to me right away, which was great.
What I liked is that in the group text, I offered what I assumed by the lack of the tepidness of the response that I got was a lackluster guest. My idea for a guest, you never even responded, C.H. Siddons,
which is not like me.
And then you come through with with Natalie Wexler today. So
the follow through sometimes doesn't work out with some of your guests.
No, I had that person.
You ghosted me.
I could have locked them up. Anyway, I enjoyed listening to her. I had to bite my tongue a few times.
I think it could have been a longer discussion for sure. And I think, we just behind the scenes here, we talked a bunch after we got off the interview, and maybe some questions in the past we'd wished we had gone down, maybe some assumptions that she had made that we probably disagreed with, but such is the nature of interviews.
Such is life.
We
could always have her back on.
Is a knowledge-rich classroom really, or lack thereof, the cause,
heart of it? The
cause of Americans' broken school systems?
Well, I think the premise of the question is something that we as a podcast disagree with.
Admittedly biased.
Well, correct, but our whole premise of our podcast is that public education is alive and well, and not dying and not dead.
Yeah,
Ed's not dead.
Why didn't we say that?
In the moment, I didn't think about it. It's like that, when
we
you
don't
have
know how to be contrarian without being offensive.
Correct, and when you have someone like say something in a meeting and then you think about a comeback. Like 3 days later.
Day,
I also, not to be a relativist, but I would have liked to talk more about, so this knowledge-rich classroom, who's defining what the knowledge is?
Yeah.
Is whose position is it to say to underprivileged kids, this is the knowledge you need?
Right. Yeah, yes.
The requisite knowledge.
Right. And then how does race play into that?
Yep.
What schools is she talking about? Is she talking about schools with mostly black and brown kids, and there's some canon of knowledge that they don't have.
Well, I think back to our interview with Erica Buddington in season 1 or season 2, and she talked about like micro curriculum, if you recall.
Yeah.
So she was, I can't remember, somewhere in New York City.
Good pull, Mr. Graves.
Yeah, but talking a lot about hyper-local ideas and issues for a place like New York that has so much history.
Yeah.
And so much knowledge to understand. You walk down the street and this building used to be this building, and this area has changed this way. And this,
Right.
I mean, that is in and of itself incredibly valuable and content rich.
Right.
But wouldn't be appropriate for a kid in Iowa or something like that. It just isn't relatively important.
Yeah.
To that
I mean,
child.
I do think a knowledge-rich classroom is code for a certain kind of knowledge.
Yeah.
Don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking
Facts and figures.
and Western civilization,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think there are folks that would take exception to that. Full disclosure, none of the three of us went there
True.
in our interview,
True.
right?
Cowards.
So, cowards. Maybe part 2.
But I will and would be interested to hear feedback from others. Just because we have sat now on this interview and thought about it for a little bit, and I think I will continue to do so. And kind of new questions will arise. So I'd be interested what other people think about that as well.
Yeah.
I don't think we disagree necessarily with the premise that certainly knowledge is important. I just don't know if I totally buy into the idea that schools have completely missed the boat because they've just been exclusively skilled.
All they do is teach skills and
I
no
don't-
content
yeah,
ever.
I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, you got something to say, Mr. Sitz? Last word.
The one piece did resonate with me. She mentioned very early about, I can't remember the phrase exactly, but it was about achievement gaps and opportunity gaps. And
Yeah, I know where you're going.
the one thing she mentioned about schools being measured on whether they're success or failure based on tests, standardized tests. And to that, I agree.
Yeah, true.
But I can't think we should ever dismiss the opportunity gap that exists in schools where there are low or students that are students of color and in low SES areas, and how much a detriment that is to just students' general overall well-being and learning environment. It goes beyond just learning about the War of 1812.
Yeah. But she didn't say this, but I wonder if Miss Wexler would argue that denying kids knowledge is part and parcel of the opportunity gap.
And I could see that. I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's an argument to be made there.
Are you saying that if they're not getting knowledge, therefore they're being drilled with skills instead of getting the rich knowledge that maybe they could be getting if they had the skills?
I watched it firsthand after No Child Left Behind in 2001, that there was this publishers like Sopris West created completely prescriptive, dumbed down reading programs that lacked almost any kind of knowledge base that kids had to learn. And who do you think the kids were that were bludgeoned with those programs? Right. And it was all in the name of raising test scores,
right,
and teaching kids to read. And so I do think that there were inequities there. Yeah. If you weren't one of those kids or in one of those schools or areas of the country, you didn't have to suffer through that.
Yeah.
And again, that was in the unholy quest to try to make adequate yearly progress.
Right.
And to avoid draconian, ever increasing and draconian penalties.
Yeah. What's my phrase?
Coercive accountability.
Okay. All right. Anyway, do you have a quiz for us, Mr. Sids? No quiz.
No quiz.
We did the quiz with Natalie Wexler.
That's right.
Yes.
All right. What do we got coming up on episode 8? That would be nothing.
I don't know.
Well, so
but what I can tell you is
hold on.
we got some good blog posts.
Yeah.
Oh,
Let me give you the title. Let me whet your appetites.
You got some. You got some.
I got some titles, some working titles. I got some.
What
I
was
got
your
some blogs
what
in
was
the
your
fires.
mangled cliche?
I got some. I'm working on some balls of wax.
He's got some boats in the
All right,
fire.
give us your blog.
First one: the failure of social studies. How lackluster social studies instruction fueled the crisis in our republic.
Whoa.
Is that too big?
It's like an Atlantic article.
I hope I could write it.
That's
I hope I could finish
It's a
it.
good title. Yeah.
that's heavy.
All right, next one. Putting the onus on us. Why we should stop blaming kids.
Okay. I like that.
And last but not least, the case against treating high school students as adults.
Very good. All right.
So
Are high school students treated like adults?
when it's convenient,
It's a case against it.
right?
So looking forward, you're giving Robbie a
He didn't even
look.
listen.
Oh,
He didn't even listen.
he's tight-lipped over there. I see him.
I'm listening.
Yeah.
Taking it all in.
So I went to a conference a week or two ago, put on by an organization called Learning in the Brain.
How was your hotel room?
I stayed with my brother.
You went on the cheap.
I would be a squeaker,
You
as you well know.
You are a total squeaker.
So maybe the conference was in part chosen for that reason. But I saw some good speakers. So once we get a date hammered out, I think there's a couple that I would like to.
You saw Pete Hall.
I saw Pete Hall. Yes,
yeah.
I did.
Yeah, you were impressed.
He's a very compelling speaker.
Can we get him on the pod?
I think so.
All right.
He lives in Idaho.
Yeah, I knew that.
Yeah,
I saw him
Coeur
speak one
Coeur
time.
d'Alene.
Yeah, he's a Western guy.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Yep. He seems like a Western guy, kind of.
He doesn't wear a bolo.
No, he does. He does not. He
When you
does
say a
not.
Western guy, I
Does
think
does he have
bolos?
Does he
No,
wear
he's kind of
Spurs?
he's kind of an independent-minded guy.
Yeah, I'd agree with
yeah,
that.
yeah, he's got that Western spirit.
Yeah.
a little bit.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and then another lady, a sociologist, who talked about anxiety for up your alley, Robbie, mostly in relation to high school students.
Oh.
In the formula, kind of where the ever increasing anxiety comes from, and then how to combat it to make happier, healthier children.
Generalized anxiety.
Yes.
Yeah, it is quite diagnosed.
Yes.
Yep. All right. Cool. Any professional endeavors you got coming up, Mr. Krabs?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I tell you, having an article published is like, all right,
Yeah.
I want to write another
more?
one and do it.
I want more.
I don't.
You're past,
Especially
that
since
stage.
I contributed very little to the last one. All right. As always, Ed's Not Dead is brought to you by Pulp Education, a full-service educational media company specializing in leadership, instruction, and 21st century school reform. You can find us on Twitter at Ed's Not Dead PC, and check us out on our website if you want to go back and listen to archive shows. They are all there on edsnotdead.com, plus 3 guys in great suits that you can check out, right?
Pretty sharp.
Yeah.
Yep.
Pretty sharp.
Thanks for joining us, folks. Boys, any last words?
Have a great week of learning, everybody.
Yeah. And thanks again to Natalie Wexler. Mr. Krabs, thanks for making sure we got here. We'll see you soon. Thanks.